Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Norwich Talk for the second episode of our mini-series entitled The Review. I'm delighted to welcome back a fairly familiar face at this point to the Norwich City sphere, Mr. Stuart Hodge. Hodgey, how you doing?
I am actually just seem to be the podcast ninja right now, don't I? I'm appearing in every podcast under the sun. Yes, promiscuous, indeed. Lacking in any sort of great judgment between what I go on and what I don't. But yes, I'm here again and looking forward to Championship football. Premier League's rubbish anyway, so quite happy that we're going for the Championship bandwagon. Come on.
We are looking forward to the Championship, but I am, and I'm also not looking forward to this episode because this is what you described on WhatsApp as the crux of Norwich season. So I think this is probably the most interesting point of the season. One that we just look back on and think, Christ's sake, why? But I mean, that is the life of being a Norwich City fan. In today's episode, we'll be going over sort of December, essentially. We'll start at Arsenal at home and we'll finish just before lockdown. A period for Norwich City that was devastating in retrospect. I mean, you could sort of see it at the time, couldn't you? And to be honest with you, we could talk about a load of games, but I don't think we will. I think we'll talk about December in isolation because, as I said, you know, you look at the results. I think out of the 8 games within that sort of month, we took the lead in 6 of them, and we'll get into that a little bit further on. But we'll start against Arsenal.
That stat that kept getting trotted out, isn't it? About how often we sort of lost leads and what the league table would have looked like if games ended at half time, and a lot of that was predicated on what happened in December because that was just like
it really poor, wasn't it? Do you know what? I was going to get that table out, but I don't think I can hack looking at it. I don't think I can stomach it without just wanting to cry. It's just in the corner of a room thinking we should probably be in the Premier League, but we aren't. Not that we deserve to be by any means. You know, that's something we should quickly stress. But we'll start at Arsenal. Norwich drew the game 2-2 just before, I think it was the Everton win, wasn't it? So spirits were fairly high. You watched that game, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was the game where, and we spoke about this the last time we were on a podcast, it was the game where Amadou looked really like something. I thought he looked like Alex Tettey with better mobility, and we basically had a better version of that kind of player. No disrespect to Tettey, who everybody knows is an absolute legend, right? But I thought we had a player that was younger, more mobile version of that. And in that Arsenal game, he looked like a proper midfield enforcer. And I thought, okay, right, it's good to see him playing in his right position for a change. We could have a player here. This could be something. I think at this point in the season, we'd played well against some of the sort of bigger teams. It wasn't before Pukki had completely dried up. That wasn't really hitting yet. And we were kind of thinking like, you know, we're right in the mix here to have a decent season. You know what I mean? It wasn't looking like it was going to be the absolute sort of catastrophe that it turned out in the end. And if you told me at this point that 35 points or so would keep you up, I would have backed us to get it going into this month.
Yeah, no, it was really frustrating because there were 3 things that I took from that Arsenal game. I remember there's a video on the channel, which I'm going to encourage you to watch just to laugh at because I said at the end of that video, we'll be fine. And the 3 things that I took from that game were 1, Bernd Leno is really bloody good and probably the reason we've not won that. I remember Kenny McLean, I think it was 2-2 at that point where he's 1-on-1 and he's done all he can. He's stuck it past, well, ideally he's stuck it past Bernd Leno, but he's stuck a fingertip out and just about saved it. I think proving his worth for Arsenal and the fact that he probably is one of the better Premier League goalkeepers. The other thing was
Leno, by the way, just on him, he was playing in the Bundesliga about 17-year-old or something. I remember when he emerged. And the thing that stuck out is he was a bit like Iker Casillas when he broke through at Real Madrid all those years ago in the 90s. He was just such a talented shot stopper. I think there's weaknesses with Bernd Leno as a goalkeeper. Maybe letting cross balls and in terms of commanding sort of things, a wee bit communication, but in terms of his shot stopping ability, he's up there with the best. And he showed it in that game. And the fact that he had to show it in that game shows that it was another game where Norwich City played well, but didn't get 3 points.
Well, exactly. That was, you know, if we'd have known at the time that game would probably sum up Norwich City's month, then I don't think I would have been as optimistic following the game. But as I said, Amadou for me was really, really good. He made that block at the end, didn't he? And as you said, he looked like what he was meant to be, which was the next gen Alex Tettey, this sort of big physical player who can play football a little bit better perhaps than Tettey could. I think Amadou's 26, 27, something like that. So it was like, right, we've got a player on our hands here. We'll get onto his second performance in that position after this game, because, as we said, that was a fairly terrible one. You were at the game, weren't you, in Southampton? And the other thing, as I said, the final thing was I thought Norwich would be fine. And in that video, I was just sat there like, we've played really well. And we were unlucky not to win the game, I think. And I think Arsenal also were lucky not to lose, if you know what I mean. In terms of comparing the two. And Aubameyang obviously scored that penalty that I think was encroached by Max Aarons or something like that. And I remember him like doing the front flip and shushing us in the NNP. I was just sat there like, you're a £75 million striker and you're shushing us after scoring your second penalty. Standards. I think Arsenal at that point had Freddie Ljungberg managing. So I think it was like any point they would take at that point. I think it was just, let's not lose, stop the rot, following sort of the downfall and demise of Unai Emery. But what did it affect your positivity overall towards the season? Because, it was a positive game for Norwich following a win as well. But was that, did you see any sort of cracks at any point?
What, during that specific game?
Yeah, was there anything?
More so my mindset. And it came sort of later in the month, as we'll come on to in the Spurs game as well. Like, there were so many occasions this season where I felt the fine margins when we were back in those halcyon days when we were playing well. I think that it was as if we weren't getting the rub of the green. The fine margins weren't going our way. And I think that was the period where I sort of went, right, okay, it looks as if things are conspiring against us a wee bit, because obviously we'd had the defensive crisis as well. And things are beginning to mount up on the kind of, well, what you could call the excuses list, which, to be honest, post-restart, we obliterated that list of excuses in terms of how poor we were. But yeah, at this point, my feeling was more just like, things aren't going our way. We're not getting the luck here, rather than cracks appearing that I thought were the fault of the team or the way we were playing.
I think what we're going to do now is we're going to sort of dip our toes in very polarized views following sort of the Southampton performance, which wasn't very fun. You said you were there off camera.
Yeah, it was. Right? Yeah, that's right. Me and my mate Michael McCann jumped. He's also a sports journal, by the way, and commentator. Me and him, we got the train down there, and we really sort of enjoyed it. I've got a couple of mates that are Saints fans, so we met up with them in the pub beforehand. Good banter and stuff, good chat about the game. But Norwich City were absolutely awful. Really, really poor. I mean, the eventual result does not reflect how the paucity of the performance, because there was umpteen times in that first half where Southampton were just cutting us open at will. And something about that Hasenhüttl system actually just seems to have the better of Norwich City, and the high press in midfield, and obviously three sort of attacking spearheads who are all of better quality than what we've got, to be honest, unless Emmy's having a really good day. And yeah, I mean, I think we were lucky not to be down by more at half time in that game. And Amadou obviously got hooked, replaced by Tete, who looked a bit more solid, and so ends the fable of Ibrahim Amadou at Norwich City. And yeah, that was, after that game, the question that you just asked a minute or two ago, that's where I began to think, right, this is Southampton, who were like right in the middle of trouble at the time. They weren't, they sort of went in a really good run. And by the time sort of restart had come around, they were sort of well away from the danger. But at this point, Southampton looked like relegation rivals in terms of the classification in the table, and they blew us off the park. And yeah, it wasn't a pleasant experience. I will say that.
I do remember sort of pinpointing that game, because, as you said, they were right in it with us, and it was like, yeah, if we can grab 3 points here, we're suddenly looking at perhaps a brighter season.
That was the mindset going into the game. You thought, like, if we can get a good away win here, which seemed wholly plausible on the basis of how we were playing, how they were playing, then yeah, it looked like we could really sort of. I mean, that would have been a sort of a marker, you think, like, it's like, yeah, that's a good away win at a team that we should maybe be beaten, as we thought at the time. And yeah, when you see the polarity between the two teams at the end of the season, compared to going into that game, it's really, really stark.
I think the perfect way to sort of sum up that game, I say that game more so the first half, I think we can agree, because by the second, I think Southampton had realised they don't need to try as hard as perhaps what they thought. And I think the smile before the game came from the Arsenal performance, came from the Everton win, and it just slowly turned into a frown as Danny Ings and Shane Long just pressed and pressed, and we just couldn't play our way out. And they're the games that you highlight, especially at the time. But, before the season started, they're the games that you highlight as they're the games that keep you in the Premier League.
Yeah.
And we've lost it. And we were, we deserve to lose it as well. I know you said Alex Tettey came on. Let's not forget he played an absolutely wonderful ball to Teemu Pukki for the goal, which I think really sort of maybe was sort of a visual representation that Amadou was finished, because he just came off the pitch and Tettey came on and played a ball that I didn't think anyone thought he was sort of capable of. And it was just a disaster for Norwich. And I think the goals, they both came from set pieces, didn't they? From James
They did. They were
Ward-Prowse?
two very similar corners. And yeah, I mean, we've done the corners thing to death, but yeah, it was just another example of the block not working, the zonal marking failing. But the thing is, even though it came from set pieces, Southampton were all over us as well.
Well, exactly. I think
in terms of the balance of play, it was deserved.
Oh, absolutely. I think, you make your own luck at times, don't you? I think one of them was a foul from Cantwell, which really annoyed me because it was one of them cheap fouls that you get from a young player. But for a team like Norwich, you can't afford to do that because we're so weak from set pieces. And you made a really good point on the Revere podcast about zonal, and you sort of opened my eyes a little bit. So well done for that, because I hate zonal marking, but I realised that maybe I don't as much as I thought I did, because the whole idea is that you have a block, as you said, and that block for Norwich never really does anything. So perhaps maybe I don't hate the system as much as I thought I did. Maybe it is
zonal marking in theory works really well, but you need people who can execute it. And so they have the kind of tactical awareness, and almost like if you're playing a game of football yourself, and if you're playing against a certain type of, so I'm a defender, right? I was back when I could run. And if you play against a certain type of striker, you get the ones that come up and like nip you in the leg and stuff like that, just to rile you up. You know what I mean? That kind of nasty side. And it's as if Norwich City are quite naive, sort of deer in headlights to some of that. So like the kind of, like almost a bit like the sort of Benny Hill show, like you tap them on one shoulder and run round the other side kind of thing. That's kind of what's been happening to our block in some sort of sense. I mean, I'm being humorous, but you get the point.
No, yeah.
So there's that side of it. And then it's the idea that if you get the jump on the player, the running jump, then, I mean, it doesn't matter. You could be a basketball player, like a basketball centre, 7 foot tall, and someone's still going to have a chance of winning a header against you, So that's been the problem, is that zonal marking has not worked for Norwich City, and it cost us quite a lot during this month of December as well. There was various goals that resulted, even if not directly from the set piece, from the breakdown of one and then the play back in towards our box, and it's a big problem. It's one of the big things that needs addressing this summer.
I'd probably describe it as Norwich lacking streetwise, or not being very streetwise. Is that totally then naive from Daniel Farke to stick with it, or is it a bit like, much like it has been for this season, he's doing the best with what he's given? Would you have switched to a man-to-man?
No, because look at the size of Norwich compared to other teams. So man-to-man marking relies on having better physicality, and basically what you're doing is you're matching up physically on the basis that your physicality is going to win you the headers, win you the game, whatever. And that's the idea behind that. Norwich City don't have the physical specimens in the squad to do that. So going with zonal marking is actually the sensible thing to do. Just need to be better at it. And in this game against Southampton, it cost us twice. And I remember thinking it's the same thing twice. It was total deja vu. It was a bit like that game I commentated for Norwich, where 2 goals bounced in off the back of Stockdale against Brighton. Like 2 goals in the same game. And I was like, I mean, the chances of that, whereas there's a bit more chance of what happened in this game against Southampton, but I was just like, I mean, it was one of those, you came away just feeling really deflated, and it was almost like it was a wake-up call, wasn't it? It was like, right, we're not as good as we thought.
It was a wake-up call at Norwich that he really didn't wake up to, which is really tragic. Now, we'll move on from Southampton. I think we're done with Southampton, aren't we? No, I'll get back to them a bit later in the view with the Along Come Norwich boys when we talk about a post-restart, which is arguably going to be worse, but, we've got that to look forward to. What we'll do now is we'll generalise, say, the next 4 or 5 games, because we played Sheffield United, we played Leicester, we played Wolves, we played Villa, we played Spurs, we played Palace. Now, apart from Villa, all of them games, Norwich City
Spurs,
took
by the way,
lead.
I'm exempting Spurs from that because I have a whole. I'm still angry about Spurs. So
I will mention VAR. That will rattle you.
yeah.
Thank you,
That's
Hodgey.
fine. The rest of them, I'm quite happy to bracket into one. Leicester's an example of one of those games where we played against one of the Premier League's leading lights at home. Power of the Carrow Road crowd really seen in that game as it was against a lot of the big teams where we played really well, but again, didn't come away with what we necessarily deserved, I don't think, in terms of the level of performance. I just think that's been the problem for Norwich City throughout the entire month. Was we played well against the good teams and not so well against the not so good teams, and that in fact through the season really, and that's really been the issue. But I mean, the likes of that Sheffield United game, 2 goals from fullbacks, or wing
Really
backs.
cheap goals as well.
Yeah, and you can't do that against them. I mean, to score against them was hard enough this season, let alone to concede 2 cheap goals. And we conceded too many cheap goals. That was a repeated thing. Villa, to be honest, for Villa to do the double over you in such fashion is, I mean, and I know they kind of, after they got the luck against Sheffield United, seemed to find some form, but Villa were beatable this season, and they did us over quite comprehensively. And I think that's the issue with most of it, and that's why you're just sitting here kind of going, well, what could have been. But I think the point I would like to make on it is, as well, with the home games in particular, even though we didn't get necessarily the 3 points more often than not, the big issue for me was after the restart, you saw how far off it we were without that crowd behind us. And I'm a critic of the Carrow Road crowd. They annoy me quite a lot of the time by making the players nervous and get it forward and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the power of that crowd can be seen in how poor Norwich were at home after the restart. Definitely.
Absolutely. I think, do you know what? I'm going to ask you a question after we speak a little bit about Villa, which is just the fact that game probably frustrated me the most. I mean, I will exempt Spurs from this, as you said, because of VAR, but that Villa game really sort of just annoyed me massively, because I think there was, Pukki must have been one-on-one 2 or 3 times. I think Buendia had a chance. Teti had one cleared off the line, didn't he, from a corner? And then the goal came from Tom Tribal sort of switching off from a throw-in that should have been given our way. And I think that game was probably the most frustrating for me. What was the most frustrating for you, bar Spurs? Because we'll move on to Spurs in a minute. But out of that sort of list of fixtures, what would you pick as the most sort of winnable, most frustrating?
Probably the Sheffield United game, because of the nature of it. Because the 2 goals came quite quickly after one another.
Yeah.
Because we were better than them last season. I mean, over the course of the like 2 seasons ago now, given that the season's ended. But yeah, in the title winning season, we won the title. They didn't.
Yeah.
And against one of the teams that you come up with, I think it's just a case of sort of saying, why are we looking like the naive team here when it was us that won the title? And the fact, it was the way the goals came, the way it was in quick succession, the way they were cheap. I think that was the most frustrating one, because you can make mitigating cases, but the other, Leicester away, points, good result. Yeah. Wolves are a good team, like a really good team. Like sort of, they've kind of broken that glass ceiling of sort of middle Premier League teams to kind of threaten in Europe. Villa away, even though we lost, I mean, that was a frustrating one as well. Because Villa, to actually not score against Villa when at that point in time when their defence was very, very leaky, was quite something. And then I don't know if you're including the game just after it kind of turned to January in this, but when it's
we'll include Palace. Yeah.
Connor Wickham in the last 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it was. I mean, it was always going to be him, wasn't it? And yeah, I mean, there's so many things you can point to and just go, but aye. So yeah, the Wickham one was a sickener. But in terms of sort of summing up how frustrating it was the Sheffield United one, because we had time to respond as well after they get their 2 goals. And I just don't feel... I actually, by the end of that game, even though you could make an argument that we were the better team in some ways, it was almost like we didn't deserve it because of our naivety. That was the emotion I came away with from that game. And that, even before the restart, would have been like my kind of thing of, yeah. I think the Southampton game, we were poor, but to follow up with that as well, it was like, this is at home against one of the teams you come up with. You've got to get at least a point. Like, on paper, I know it doesn't work on paper, because on paper you shouldn't beat Man City at home either, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the one where it was 2 real sickeners, one after the other. And that was when I just thought, right, this isn't going to be pretty here. This is going to be a long, long, hard fight. And yeah, I mean, Southampton, because it was away from home, you're like, it was away from home. So we're back at home, point to prove. Yeah. And that was why, yeah, that Sheffield United game, that felt like, for me, the kind of watermark moment in the season where, right, this could go really badly. Not quite as badly as it did, admittedly.
Yeah.
I didn't think at that point. But yeah, at that point, I thought, we could well be going down here. And that was the first time, actually, this season that I had that emotion in such a clear way. And that's why I was probably most disappointed with that one.
John, I think you're absolutely spot on with Sheffield United, because, as you said, the 2 goals that came immediately after half time, I think they're in like the 56th and 58th minute, something crazy like that. And it was that leads on to a nice question I'll ask you in a minute, which is about Daniel Farke. And I think we will look at it from a broader point of view before we then move away from that period, because it's not a pleasant one. But I think the general softness of the goals, the first one was a cross, I think, to Stevens at the back post, and just there was no real contention for Max Aarons. Now, I don't think that there is Max Aarons' job to deal with it. That's where in my head I pictured a 3 at the back, then having 3 centre-backs to challenge. Who knows? That's for a different time. And then the second goal was Sam Baldock, wasn't it? And he's just turned Mario Vrancic far too easily. And that, for me... George Baldock, sorry. Sam Baldock plays for Brighton. He's a striker, isn't he? That's
he's a striker.
Not Sam Baldock. But he turned Vrancic far too easily, and it was such a visual representation of how soft Norwich have been this season. And I think it went through Tim Krul's hand. I think you would have been frustrated with it.
Yeah, Krul, I was just going to say on Vrancic, that was one of the games where all of the sort of Vrancic eulogists, right, who sort of think, yeah, we've got to fling Mario in the team. For all Mario's moments of magic, it's those moments where he switches off, where he's physically found wanting. That's why he didn't play as much this season. Yeah. It's moments like that.
It's hard to disagree, isn't it? Especially because at the time you think Norwich need a bit of magic, but you do, but you also need solidarity, and Mario Vrancic doesn't bring that. It'll be very interesting to see if he stays at Norwich next season, because I don't think he will, for what it's worth. I'd love to see him stay, sure. But as you mentioned on the last podcast, you changed my view on him, which was he's fairly old for a player of Norwich City standards anyway, and he seems to be fairly injury prone. And Daniel Farke doesn't seem to use him as much as what Norwich fans would like, so it makes sense for him to leave. But yeah, I think that's probably us done with that period. Would you say so? Which I say done with that period. I have one more question, which is this is a big one, and it sort of goes back to the podcast you were on before, which is about should Daniel Farke be sacked. Now, I don't think I asked this question at the time, so I'll ask it now, which is, what do you think Daniel Farke was saying at half-time in them team talks? Because as I said here, 6 of the 8 games, Norwich City took the lead in, played some really good football. You look at Wolves, played really good stuff. Arsenal, Todd Cantwell scores a brilliant goal before half-time, and so on. Spurs, we should have, I think we were winning at half-time, weren't we, against Spurs? And it's just like, what is he saying at half-time? Where's it going wrong?
Well, you're going to come on to VAR and Spurs, so I'm looking forward to that, because I'm still angry about that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, right?
Oh, yes,
we've had it on the. I mean, I think like a lot of people who watch or listen to this podcast, and I know me and you both do play Football Manager, right? So one of the team talks you can give is that I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but it's like we've only got a goal up, keep your focus, or whatever it is at halftime. So
you never used that one.
I have used it on occasion, like if I'm winning.
I stay clear.
No, it's like if I'm winning a cup game against a big team, or like if I feel I'm against like one of the league's lower lights, or we've been poor towards half time, it's like, right, lads, keep the focus, like, and then it pretty much inevitably you end up conceding a goal fairly early in the second half. So maybe Daniel Farke was hitting that button on his internal football
Would
manager.
you not then stop hitting that button? That's what did me. It's the fact that it kept
listen, right. See, the thing is, right, I can't pretend to be privy to what it's like. Different managers have different ways at halftime. Some of them lose the place and start throwing stuff. Some of them are very, very calm. Different methods of communicating work differently and work to varying degrees for different managers. Different managers as well have the different approaches depending on the player. It's like it depends. I don't think you can just say Daniel Farke's like saying, right, lads, lay down the tools, we're a goal up, it's sound at half time. I don't think that's happening. I think to be honest, you've got to lay it at the players' door, because it's Daniel Farke's not doing it. I didn't see it. Where you would point the finger at the manager, right, is where if he'd changed something tactically, if he'd said, right, lads, let's be a bit more defensive, right? Defensive minded in how we approach it. I did not see any evidence that Daniel Farke was saying, right, let's hold on to what we've got, particularly in many of those games, or at least not directly after halftime, right? If that had been the case, if it had been a change in system or a change in mindset from the team, then I would have said, right, you can lay the blame at the manager. Or if it'd been like where he hadn't sort of said, right, let's remember we're a goal up here. I think there was the right balance between being a bit more conservative when we had a lead and not sort of changing too much that we were inviting pressure. I think it was just the fact is we were conceding silly goals because people weren't doing their job for the most part. So for me, it lies at the player's door rather than the manager or the head coach's door.
I think that's probably, again, I keep saying this, it's just such a representation. I want to use a different word, but I can't think of one, of the season, and the fact that there was no iron between the players' legs was there. Is
emblematic.
There you go. I'll leave that word with you there. But
emblematic of the season.
Emblematic.
Reflective.
There you go. I'll use that one in the next podcast, and I'll reference you there as well.
I'll give you a few synonyms in a list, and you can use them.
I'd be very grateful for that.
Of the whole season is true, and this month just summed it up. Really, not one win, losing points in games from winning positions, and done over by poor decisions. And you've got the date there. When was it? Yeah, it was just after Boxing Day was Villa. 2 days later, no rest. We played Spurs at home and we got cheated. What
are your views on that then? Is it just like Norwich were screwed? Norwich were just shafted? How much do you think that impacts the season?
At that moment in the game, Teemu Pukki scores that goal, Norwich win that game. Right?
Absolutely.
I'm saying that now.
Absolutely.
Right? That's happening. Right? We would all won that.
That puts us 2-0 up, doesn't it?
A massive win for us. Absolutely huge. One of the big teams, albeit one that's fallen from grace and their standards have really gone down a bit. But that would have been absolutely massive for Norwich. And it might have given us, you could argue, these are all ifs and buts, right? But it might have given us the belief to see through the Palace game rather than going, let's hang on to this 1-0 lead, and then Connor Wickham pops up with that goal. I think that Spurs game, I mean, VAR, right? Do you want it? Don't you want it? Right? Everyone's got sort of their view on that. I was very pro VAR, right? I thought it worked really well when it was trialled at the World Cup.
I liked it as well, yeah.
Yeah, I thought this could be good for the game, Yeah. And I was thinking, right, okay, so it's the Premier League, right? The great glitzy Premier League that everyone goes on about. Surely they're going to do a better job at implementing it than everyone else. But no, they decided to go their own way about interpreting how it should be done before rolling back on all of that, doing it like everyone else. But there was the recent example as well, where Kevin Friend's looking at that elbow from Emmy and he's sending him off, but he's getting one angle of it. And it's like they've just not learnt how to use VAR. Even they've had a big break. They even had a break to sit down and go, here's what we should do. Now, granted, there were other stuff that they had to organise, but what they did is, right, with that Spurs goal, I've never seen anything like that in my life, right? It was, the way I described it at the time is it's like a Venn diagram, right? getting applied to a football game, and you're talking about the finest of margins, man. Like, honestly, it was like a nasal hair width, right? You could argue whether it was on or off, and it didn't even look clear either way. And they're sitting looking at it for about 10, honestly, it was 3-4 minutes of nothing, right?
Yeah.
And you're a paying season ticket holder, right? So you're paying for someone to sit and scratch their behind looking at a monitor, right? And then coming up with the wrong decision anyway. And it's a vital decision. You've got VAR has been a colossal disaster in the Premier League this season. You've got a team that has stayed up because of an erroneous goal line technology decision when VAR was there to back it up. I mean, you could not make that up. You could not make that up. Technologically, the Premier League have been absolutely dreadful this season.
Is there room for improvement?
Oh, yeah, room for improvement, mate.
Do you think? Well, do you think they will improve? There you go.
It's hard to say, but like, I mean, they need to. If you're going to have VAR, right? So we're going to have VAR in the Premier League. That's a given, right? They're not going to go back on that because they would look very backward thinking. I almost think, right, it's a unique selling point now for Scottish football or for the Championship that you've not got that nonsense, right? Because it inhibits your enjoyment of a football game. Like that moment of ecstasy, right? Of yes, we've scored is now like, yeah, oh, yeah, right? Or yeah, oh. Right? Yep. It's like that moment is taken away from you. And that in itself is a bastardization of what this sport is about, right? So that's an argument against it. But if you're going to have VAR, right, cool, that's the plan. Do it like they did it at the World Cup, where you don't have it encumbering every decision, and it's some of it, common sense and instinctual sort of refereeing is applied, right? Rather than this, oh, well, he might have strayed offside about 5 minutes ago in the move, right? No, just no, right? Yeah. And this drawing lines and angles and no, right? Do you know a clear interpretation of the offside rule would help this as well, right? Because they messed about with that year after year, changing interpretations. Is it body? Is it sunlight? Is it what? Right? Clear sunlight between the bodies from an angle at the side of the pitch. If you can see a clear distance, there's a gap, then yes. If it's like incrementally one shoelace ahead, no. So I hate it. And I hated that game, and I hated football after that game. I was working a shift at Sky Sports, and I was it was hard because I had to do my work, right? But I was the one clipping that up, and I was absolutely raging, man. Like I was just like, you know, that way I'm wanting to type all sorts of expletives in the Sky Sports PL account tweets, but I couldn't. So raging, man. Still raging, still angry. Can you tell?
I could tell, to be honest with you. Do you know what? You've jerked a memory there. I've got 2 points on what you said. Obviously, I completely agree that VAR is somewhat of a farce and it undermines the point of there being a referee on the pitch to begin with. If the referee went over to his monitor, blah, 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 maybe it'd be better because it would be the referee making the decision. But the thing before I get onto the Pukki goal is that I remember not celebrating Tetty's goal versus Sheffield United because I thought, it's clipped Zimmerman on his arm or something. I thought, that's no goal. And then it was given and I stood there like, I should probably feel a bit happier than what I feel right now, but I'm relieved that we've not been just sort of cheated out of a goal. As you I think you used the word cheated there, didn't you? And
takes away.
It really does. It's tragic. It is a tragedy in football. And the thing for the Spurs game, which really sort of boiled my beans, was the fact that at that point in the season, at that point in Norwich City's December run-in, that goal was crucial. Because you look at all these results here, Norwich scored 1 goal. We scored 2 goals once. And it was like the whole issue was that Norwich couldn't get the second goal. We got the second goal. And it was for Pukki as well, as his form had dried up a little bit at that point. And
that's another thing. You're right. It would have been massive for him. That could have re-sparked another run of goals for him. Like, obviously, we didn't know about the COVID train that was going to hit. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It could have, I mean, there's so many mitigating or so many different factors that this could have had a domino effect on. And I mean, it just had such a profound, it was basically like a big stake in the ground saying, this season's not happening for you guys.
I was going to mention Mario Vrancic and the goal itself and the fact that as we mentioned earlier, we've been calling out for so much creativity, and Vrancic whips an unbelievable ball across the field. And I know Jan Vertonghen, there'll be questions asked, but I think shut up to those questions. That is an unbelievably weighted ball. That's what he brings to the team. Obviously, he scored a goal in the game as well, questionable from Gazaniga, but it was a really good, a good finish. And he's played just such a fantastic ball to Teemu Pukki, who's finished beautifully. That is Championship 18-19 title-winning stuff right there. That's the stuff that got us into the league. And it goes like that. And I remember at the end of the decision, or when the decision was made, they showed it on the screen, and they only show it on the screen when the decision's wrong. And you just heard the groans and the cries of what the hell is going on. And obviously we then got home and watched it on Match of the Day or whatever I watched it on, and you just sat there like, and that for me, that at that point, that was me not done, but I was like, right, I can't see us turning this around.
You're right about that Vrancic pass as well. That was one of the definitely for a Norwich City perspective, one of the passes of the season, and yeah, just sad.
It really is. Right, okay. We're finished with Spurs. We're finished with December. We're gonna mention two things.
To be fair, we weren't finished with Spurs. We gave them a battering and a penalty shootout later on in the season, but you'll come on to that.
That's a very good. We're done with the 28th of December Spurs. We'll get on to March Spurs or February Spurs, whenever it was, in a minute. But we've got two more things to talk about, which is we'll talk about the January transfer window, because that was a chance for Norwich City to perhaps change the fortune, turn the tide, however you want to phrase it. And then a little bit of hope, I'll call it, before lockdown, because there wasn't there? We won a couple of games, won the penalty shootout, played all right against Sheffield United, but we'll get into that in a minute. What do you make now of the fact that, so we made 4 signings. We signed Lucas Rupp, Andre Duda, Melvin City, Sam McCallum. The latter two went back out on loan to their clubs, didn't they? What are we saying about that? At the time, cast your mind back to the time. What did you make of the signings?
I thought Andre Duda was going to be really good. I saw him be quite an effective player in the Bundesliga when he played for Hertha under Paul Dardai, who called him like his little magician and stuff. And I was quite excited because, to be honest, we had a pretty good track record of bringing players in from Germany who are less well-known players from lower down the pyramid quite often. Yeah. And I thought, this is going to be quite an exciting one. Rupp, I was less enthusiastic about, and probably right to be, because I think Duda was partly the victim of coming into a failing team. If he'd come in, say, last season, in the Championship season, he might have looked really good because he was coming into a team that was full of confidence and really sort of lively, playing with a lot of verve. I think it could have worked. Rupp, I think, is pretty. I mean, he can do a job, and he's quite versatile. But I don't see a great footballer there. And given his age as well, it seemed like a pretty strange one to me. And I put on, when I had Stuart Webber on my podcast, I said to him, Championship player, and at best. And he sort of said, well, he's played in the Bundesliga all his career, so I'm not sure I would agree with that. But one of them where me and Stu beg to differ, you know.
He might have changed his mind.
I'm not claiming to know more about football players than Stuart Webber, by the way. But yeah, I think there was a methodology behind both of those signings that I can see. And as I say, I think Duda in other circumstances could have worked. But yeah, I mean, they both. I think Rupp actually probably comes away with slightly nearer approaching pass marks because of his versatility and because we've kind of seen that he can do the midfield shuttling job. And tactically, he seems quite a tactically aware and clever, semi-clever player. Yeah. Whereas Duda more is expected, he's a flair player. And yeah, it just didn't work for him whenever he was deployed as Norwich City's number 10. And that is disappointing. I think there's also an argument, given we've had more defensive crises have followed, that I think everyone was crying out for a defender to be bought during January. I was certainly one of the ones who wanted another body up top, which I'd kind of roll back on because of the emergence of Adam Ida more prominently. But yeah, defensively, I still felt we could have done with another body, and the ones in midfield just proved not to be good enough. I'm sure it was part of the deals, at central defence, I should say. I'm sure it was part of the deals for McCallum and City to what will have knocked the fee down in terms of what we are spending out. We'll be saying, right, you can keep them till the end of the season. Is there an argument to say getting Melvin City in earlier would have worked better? Yes, there is. Although, who's to say that he would have been ready and his conditioning would have been right for the Premier League, making such a step up, you know? So there's various things to consider there.
I think the thing with City as well, was he on a professional contract at his previous club? I don't think he was he? So I think
I don't know his contract situation, to be honest.
I think I remember reading that he wasn't. So I think the step up would have been massive for him. And, you know, there is an argument there, I guess. But I definitely agree we should have signed a centre-back. I think Stuart will probably say now we probably should have, maybe. I mean, he's very sort of straightforward and he doesn't change his mind too often. But with Rupp and Andre Duda, I think I agree with you. You know, if Duda comes into a team playing with confidence, he does well. I think the thing where Duda failed, but where it was a bit too much for him was the fact that that position, that 10, that hole behind the striker had not been claimed by anyone. I think McLean made the best case for it with a couple of decent performances, decent at best, 6s and 7s.
That says something as well, because Kenny McLean's a number 8, right? So
well, exactly, yeah.
That's the thing. So for him to make the best case for it says a lot about how Norwich have been. I mean, Todd's had the odd stint there. I still think Amy. Like Amy's
not Emmy. No,
Hodgey, but he's a number 10. He's a number.
But the thing is, for me, right, this is what really annoys me with the argument for either Todd or Emmy, is that they've had all their success out wide in their positions. Why then change it?
Because then you can play O'Neill as well.
I mean, do you know what? I can't really argue against that at this point because of how catastrophically terrible we were between.
I just think Amy Buendia is the identikit of a number 10, right?
Do you think
so?
And
I know he's played coming in off the right. Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that can see passes that nobody else can see and then thread.
I suppose you don't rely on him defensively either, then, do you?
Yeah, although I think the best number 10 for Norwich City this season has been, lo and behold, Marco Stiepermann playing as a kind of weird target man number 10, allowing Pukki to sort of roam round about him. And yeah, I think that's a bigger question for me, is why we didn't see more of the reverting to Stiepermann at 10, because I think it made sense to give Duda a few cracks of the whip, but by a certain time, it was quite clear that it just wasn't happening for him and he needed a break or a chance to sort of reinvigorate himself, whatever.
I think it was a desperation to change. That's what I think. I think it was just sort of it was a reactive thing, which is interesting, isn't it? Because the argument against Daniel Farke was that he's not very reactive. He's not very proactive or whatever. He doesn't like to change. However,
I think that's nonsense.
Do you know what we said on the podcast, didn't we? That is not the smartest idea. At the worst of times, at a game, I've sat there and thought, why aren't you doing something? But, you know, when the thoughts sort of are gathered properly, you then realise that perhaps he did, and perhaps that is maybe what was the downfall of Norwich post restart, maybe just before as well. But with Marco Stiepermann, I think it was just an attempt to sort of change things up. I think he played a few games, he's ballooned quite a few shots over the bar. Now, I'm probably not the best person to ask about Stiepermann because I love the guy. He was my favourite player last 2 seasons ago now. And yeah, I think it comes back to Duda, and the problem that he had and he faced was that he was never going to be this man to take the ball and drive at players, which is what Norwich City sort of needed. They needed someone who was going to sort of provide the quality to take the game by the scruff of the neck and sort of get some of them sort of dirtier wins for Norwich, because that's why they've gone down, because they couldn't get that sort of win. That's where Chris Wilder has been so good with Sheffield United, because they can get that dirty 1-0, can't they? Whereas Norwich City couldn't. We could have against Leicester. I think that was our best chance at it, and we drew 1-1. But I think that's probably where Duda went wrong. Rupp, as you mentioned earlier, was a weird one for me just because of his age. But I think he is meant to be sort of the handyman for Daniel Farke. We've seen him play right wing, right mid, centre mid, defensive mid. I don't know.
That's what Stiepermann was on the other side before we settled on a position for him, which happened to be the number 10. I famously asked on the Binkham podcast once, what is Marco Stiepermann? Because he was at one point the most confusing footballer I'd ever seen. Like, genuinely, like, he was playing left back, and I was like, right, he's not quick. Then he was playing centre midfield, and I was like, well, he's not really that mobile. And then he played in the 10, and it was like, oh, that's what he is.
That's
right?
why I said he was born to score goals. Like, genuinely, at that point in the season, he scored a few, didn't he? And he was really good in it. And he's so unorthodox because of his height. And you see this guy at 6'2", whatever he is, with twinkle toes, just twisting in and out of players. I'd love to have seen it this season. I don't know about you. I'd love to have seen him given a fairer crack at it.
Yeah, I can kind of see why he wasn't as well, if you know what I mean. But
yeah.
I think by the point of the restart, I think it was clear what was going to work and what wasn't.
Yeah.
Especially, well, maybe a couple of games in. And yeah, I think Stiepermann after the restart should maybe have been given a bit more of a crack at it, definitely. But it's going to be really interesting to see the squad turnover this summer. I think it's a fascinating summer in terms of we've already had quite a lot come in and then who goes out. So yeah, it's going to be exciting to see, actually.
Yeah, there's an interesting debate for everyone, isn't there? Right, we'll move on to conclude the video, which is we'll speak a bit about this idea of hope for Norwich. I think we can sort of agree now between January and I think it was mid-February. Let me just check my notes. Yeah, mid-February. Norwich took a couple of beatings. I think we lost to Manchester United with Adamida up top. We took a bit of a spanking from Wolves. I've got here the worst result was that heavy spanking from Wolves. And then the best result was Spurs in the cup. We'll mention that in a minute. But in terms of the league, Norwich beat Bournemouth, didn't they? Following that world-class save from Steve Cook and a goal for Teemu Pukki. That, it was a penalty, but at the time I was like, okay, he's got himself a goal. Maybe he'll score a few more. Did he? No, he didn't. And then we beat Leicester as well, didn't we? There was a loss in between, but that was away from home. I think that might have been the Man United game. But did you feel hopeful at any point that Norwich could turn it around? Because at that point, it was being described as the Great Escape, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or to be the Great Escape. It wasn't the Great Escape.
After December, it's weird, right? Because normally there would be the odd result in the normal flow of a season where you would go, oh yeah, I felt a bit of hope after this game or that game. But my hope was we would hit the ground running after lockdown, the project restart thing. I thought if we get 4 points from the first 2 games, we were in with a right good chance of staying up. And I've been proven right in that when you see how it didn't take that much. Yeah. It definitely didn't take the 40 points this season. So, I think that was the time I felt hope was coming into Project Restart, really, more than anything. This December had me thinking, and it was the Spurs game was obviously, I think it was followed by the Palace game. Is that right?
In the league at home.
Yeah, it was, yeah. So see that happening in sort of one after the other. When was the Preston game in relation to that? Was that in between or was it after the Palace game?
After Palace, because it was in January.
Right, that's right. So see, because you've got those 2 results coming off the back of each other, what you've got then is you've got a situation where you've basically the Spurs game is deflating in one way, right? Because it's the deflation of, Teemu should have scored that, should have been awarded that goal. We probably would have won that game more than likely. I'm pretty sure. I think most people are pretty sure he would have. Teemu would have had the confidence of another goal against a really big team. That would have had an effect moving forward, domino-wise. To follow that with a game where you concede a goal to a former Ipswich striker in the last 5 minutes.
Very unlucky as well, wasn't it? Because it was the stretching leg from Zimmerman and VAR, yeah.
Exactly. So see the nature of that, like 2 different types of misfortune, and can see one game where you've really been hard done by, and then another one where you've been hard done by in a totally different way, really late on against a team where Crystal Palace at home, that's one where you're hoping for 3 points if you're going to stay up. Those 2 factors combined together in such quick succession is the point where you go, right, maybe it's not our year. So after that, as I say, the point at which I felt a bit more positive was I thought the quick run, and Stuart Webber was the same. I asked him, do you think the quick run of fixtures could work in Norwich's favour? And he said, yes, one word answer on my podcast. And I agreed with him at that point. But I think what happened after the restart was it was just showing that, and to be honest, this has happened throughout the league. So you see how Sheffield United, for example, have been after the restart. Yeah. They've kind of reverted to what you thought they would be, like pretty ordinary in this league. So not having the crowd there as the sort of X factor that can influence games and the ebb and flow and the atmosphere, what's happened is the quality has risen to the top. Bruno Fernandes obviously made a difference, but it's why Man United look really, really good again.
Absolutely.
It's why Arsenal are looking better again and when they're not blowing hot and cold. Like, you're seeing quality rising to the top. Leicester have regressed to something like a mean since all of these things. And that's because, one, the flow of the season was interrupted, and two, in stadiums with no fans, better players are going to win games because there's fewer factors that are influencing the performance or how the game pans out. And that is what happened to Norwich City. Is after the restart, we looked like a team who had come up from the Championship and spent nothing.
Yeah. Came back quality, didn't it? I think, do you know what? That's a brilliant conclusion to the point, I think. So between between January and March before lockdown, relegation still seemed a certainty for us at the time. There were some good fixtures. Now, there is the good results, not fixtures. The final question I want to ask is, you can answer this from a Man City earlier in the season perspective as well, really, but the Spurs game, the FA Cup game, was magical. Right now, for me, my answer is
favourite memory as I was at the Millwall game, man, but definitely away trip, right? Away from Carrow Road, my favourite moment as a Norwich City fan, even above Graham Dorrans.
What game was that? Wasn't that Forest away?
Forest away. It was the only game, right, of that season. Of that season under Alex Neil before Alan Irvine came in, where we came back from behind to win away from home.
Did Brady score or Howson score in that? Or did Dorrans score twice?
No, Johnny Howson and Graham Dorrans.
I remember that game vividly.
It's funny how I'm in games I haven't commentated, I'm like, yeah, who got the goal? When was it? And games I have commentated, he's like, yes, him and him at this time and this time. There you go. Both goals in the second half. Apostolos Velios got the opener for Forest, and I think, was it Wes missed a penalty?
I could not tell you. You're just showing off at this point, aren't you? Showing off that Norwich City knowledge.
But what I'm saying is, key thing is, right, I loved that Forest game. I had some great away trips that season, being the commentator, and it was one of the joys of my life has been that season, being the Norwich commentator.
Hell of a season for it as well.
Oh, mate, what a crazy season, both good and bad happenings, right? But I'll tell you what, do you know what didn't compare to the feeling I felt? Do you know, it's when I knew I was a Norwich fan, through and through. And I've been a Norwich fan for a few years now, right? But see, when I knew, the level of emotion I felt reminded me of what I felt watching Celtic in the Champions League when I was a teenager. You know what I mean?
Spurs.
This is the Spurs game. And
wow.
There was a point, I can't remember, there was a Spurs player running through. My mate Michael McCann was recording something, a kind of fans view thing. I think it was for something Michael Bailey was doing.
Yeah.
And there's a bit that got cut where I'm shouting, just fucking bring him down, right? At the top of my voice, because I'm it's just all sort of veneer of professional had gone out the window. I'm just so invested in it. And I just remember the feeling after that. Timmy Krul, man. Timmy Krul.
That right there is where he won prior to the season for me. I think Jordan tweeted that on our account. That is how you achieve legendary status at a club, and the celebrations were bedlam, weren't they? Now,
it was the first time we met. We met on the way out. That was the first time we bumped into each other. And
I remember you shouting at me. I was like, "Oh, Stuart Hodge, right there. How you doing,
there you go." I bumped into everybody in Norwich City Twitter and whatever after that game. Honestly, Gemma Gifford, the old press officer. Bumped into all of my mates who had gone to the game, so including NCFC numbers, Steve Sanders, a few of my other friends who I play football with when I lived in Norwich. We're all at the game together, a totally different bit of the stand from me. And that stadium, man, it's gorgeous. Something Rick and Morty. It's like a space station. It's unreal. And just that whole night was unbelievable. And I wasn't at the Man City game because I'm not living in Norwich anymore, so obviously not getting to as many of the games. But to get to that one, especially when so I went with Michael McCann again. The last game we'd been at together was Southampton away. So imagine the contrast.
Oh dear, I think you were just relieved to not see Danny Ings up front, weren't you? Do you know what? I was going to ask this question. I don't think I need to. I'll ask it anyway. Is the high of that game alone worth the low this season? For me, yes.
See, because I don't care about the Premier League. Like, I don't really care for it, darling. Not really my bag. I prefer the Championship. Nitty gritty.
Is that yes to that then? Is that yes?
I like the Championship fine and dandy. I think the Premier League English football is going to have to change, right? Football as a whole is going to have to change. You've got superpower teams in every league around Europe who are dominating.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of the European Super League will happen. It's kind of an inevitability. And I mean,
I know what the Champions League is.
Yeah, not really, because the Champions League has the pretensions of including all the teams from places like Slovenia if they get through 19 qualifying rounds or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. Like, I think the European Super League with the clubs with the big branding and money and power is an inevitability. And I think domestic football will flourish in all of the countries left behind rather than what a lot of people think where it will really have a negative effect. But the fact that there's no VAR, the fact that it's just going to be like football, proper football again, makes me look forward to the Championship season. So on that basis, absolutely Spurs was worth it. And I'll tell you what, even though Man United have had our number this season, crowd at Carrow Road, we've got a chance in that game.
Yeah. Well, we almost won it anyway, didn't we? Even with 10 men. Right, I think that is everything. We'll go over the conclusion of everything. December was the crux of the season. That's the reason that's not the reason. That's one of the main reasons Norwich City went down. Deservedly so, to be honest with you. We hate VAR with a burning passion. We'll never like VAR, I don't think, until it's used right. Will it be used right? No, it won't. And also, we like Spurs away in the Cup. That was quite fun. There wasn't really sort of a flicker of hope between December and March. There was the possibility, but it came for you not post restart. Christ, it came for you before the restart of football. I think that's the conclusion to the whole video. Hodge, it's been an absolute pleasure. Before we say goodbye, though, where we find. Plug your socials, plug anything you want.
Oh, right, I tweet Norwich City. Sometimes I get the odd wee bit of exclusive transfer news, the Archie Mayer thing, been a wee example where I was 3 weeks ahead of everyone else. Kerching! And you can get all of that jazz on at Hodgey the Hack, HODGEY the Hack, THEHACK. And I've also got my own podcast, which has been neglected for a few weeks because I've been appearing on every Norwich City podcast imaginable, including yours.
This one times,
yeah. But yeah, that's at my Corona Pod. And I don't just talk about football there. I do interviews and all sorts of stuff. Anything from like staying sane on social media to why politics has become so divorced from what us as real people, like our lives on a daily basis, to the government's track and trace app thing, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, if you want to like listen to podcasts that aren't just about football, although that said, I have had Dan O'Hagan on it talking about the Bundesliga, Stuart Webber talking about Norwich City, and a couple of mates of mine. One who played against Gaza when he was at Rangers, and another one who's plays with one of the lower league teams, Clyde in Scotland, on episode 1. So there's all sorts of stuff there on at my Corona Pod on Twitter, and if you type my Corona Podcast into all your podcast apps, you can find it there as well.
Top man, Hodgey.
That was a long plug, wasn't it?
Do you know what? It's fine. It all will appear on the screen as well. We'll do it. Well, I say we. Jordan will do a bit of magic to make that look pretty. You basically talk about the stuff that I stay desperately away from because my brain is not even a third of the size of yours. Quite apparently.
I think that's one of the reasons I've neglected it as well, mate, because like it's just got to the point with all of this nonsense right now that I'm just like, let's be happy. Let's talk about Norwich City because
let's be happy to talk about relegation. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about our team being a record shit points total. Lovely. No, that's where we are. But, yeah, if that's my means of staying sane, that tells you how insane life has become.
that's such a beautiful way to sign off. Hodgey, it's been an absolute pleasure. If you could all like the video, I'd be very, very grateful. If you could subscribe to the YouTube channel, I'd be very grateful. We're getting so close to that 1,000 mark. We've stalled a little bit, but we're almost there. And it's a place we want to be at on the channel. That's just about everything. Before, I say before or after, when you want to watch the rest of this mini series, feel free to. I think by the time this is out, our podcast with Connor Southwell and Dave Freezer will be out. We've got pods to come with Along Come Norwich and the Revere End, where we'll be talking about post restart and who we want to sell from Norwich City's playing staff this season. And yeah, a big thank you for watching. A big thank you to everyone who listens on Spotify and iTunes. And until next time, we'll see you again very, very soon.